guys. Okay, so we are going to be talking about adoptive parent roles and roles that we wish more adoptive parents would step into. This is kind of born out of a conversation that I had with an adoptive parent a couple weeks ago, where she very explicitly asked me, hey, what do you wish more adoptive parents were doing? So we're going to chat about that. Oh no, we lost Annaleece.
I think she was kind of frozen, so she might
hop back. Okay, so while we wait for her, let's introduce ourselves, Claire. Let's introduce ourselves, our role in the triad, and a little bit about ourselves.
Awesome. Do you want me to go first?
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay. So I'm Claire. I am an adult adoptee. Adult adoptee. I'm obviously an adult. I am a domestic infant adoptee is what I meant to say. And I live in North Carolina. I have 3 kiddos. And in my spare time, I run a adoption education and kind of awareness advocacy platform called Project Dawn. And so that's kind of what brings me into these conversations. And I am more than happy to talk about my journey, my adoption, and just my perspectives and opinions.
Awesome. Annaleece, we're just introducing ourselves before we get started, and our role in the triad and a little bit about ourselves. So your turn.
Sounds good. My name's Annaleece. I am a birth mom to probably the cutest 5-year-old I've ever met in my whole life.
She is really cute. Annaleece might be biased, but I'm not, and she is really cute.
No, I'm right with how cute she is. Also, she looks like me, so. And let me think what else. I just finished up my bachelor's degree, and all I'm doing with my life right now is getting into graduate programs. So that's me.
And I'm Stephie. I am an adoptive mama to a 7-month-old baby girl. We have a really open adoption with her birth parents, and I am on Instagram as @Stephie_Predmore. And I talk a lot about our adoption, open adoption. My husband and I together experienced 3 disrupted placements and matches before our daughter was born. And so I talk a lot about disruptions and stuff like that. So that is me. So to kind of get into the meat of what we wanted to chat about today, like I said, I was having a conversation with a fellow adoptive mama, and she just said, what roles do you wish more adoptive parents stepped into? And I was like, that is such a great question, because I think it's something that a lot of adoptive parents have wondered and probably don't even know how to articulate that question. And so I wanted to get together with Claire and Annaleece so that we kind of have the whole triad here present, some voices from each part of the triad to chat about this, because I think that we have fallen into a trap where, and this is not just adoptive parents, I think this is us in society in general, that we've fallen into this trap of thinking that you have to have a platform in order to make a difference, in order to be an advocate for something. And I don't think that's true. And so, a lot of adoptive parents may not want to be influencers or have a big social platform for any given reason. But that doesn't mean that there aren't things that you can do to be an advocate for more ethical adoption, for your children, for your children's birth parents, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that can kind of look like. And so before we talk about the what's, let's chat a little bit about why it is actually really important for adoptive parents for us to use our privilege within the triad well, and why we have the power to make change where maybe adoptees and birth parents might not always be able to. So Claire, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So, and I think it's important because when I talk about adoptive parent privilege, I usually get some pushback from adoptive parents, um, mainly because they see themselves sometimes as just like the rest of us, just like adoptees and birth mothers, as kind of like at the mercy of this industry machine, right? And while that is true, like when we're talking about a triad, there's only three sides, but there is that fourth component of the industry. I do think that when you're just talking about the triad, adoptive parents hold the most power because they truly are the most quote unquote active participants that are fueling the industry. And so that's not a bad thing. I don't say that to mean a bad thing. It's just they're the ones that are spending the money and putting their time and their resources into this process. And so when we talk about advocacy and adoption reform and ethics and things like that, they're going to be the ones that are truly on the front lines, so to speak, with those professionals. So you have the professionals on the front lines, like, you know, with the expectant women, and then you have the adoptive parents who are probably like the next person in line, right? They're the ones that are making the decisions. They're the ones that are asking the questions. They're the ones that are saying yes or no. They're the ones that are deciding which ethical lines in the sand we're going to draw. And so I think it's really important for them, and whether you're a hopeful adoptive parent that's in the process of adopting, or you're an adoptive parent who the child is already placed in your home, you're already, you know, you've been in it for 5, 10, 15 years, and you might say that, well, what am I going to do? You know, I barely have time to parent the child in front of me, let alone go and be this big advocate for the adoption community. And I just think it's important sometimes to take a step back. Even myself, you know, I have to do that too. And just realize that we, like you said, you know, Stephie, we don't have to have huge platforms in order to affect change within our own families, within our own communities. You know, I know the adoption community is really tight knit. So I know that adoptive parents have other adoptive parents that they're friends with, that they communicate with. They have their church groups and things like that. And I think that they can become a voice for quote unquote the voiceless. Like, I'm not voiceless, but sometimes I am, because someone like me as an adoptee is not invited into those spaces. So I'm not able to speak, you know, for myself or for the things that I think need to be reformed or changed within adoption. So a lot of what I do or what I want to accomplish relies on adoptive parents and birth parents, but adoptive parents especially, to elevate adoptee and birth parent voices and give them the invitation into those spaces, give them the voice, give them the microphone. And so I think that's really one of the most simple things they can do, aside from investing their dollars wisely on the front end with ethical agencies. But once the child's already in your home and your adoption is finalized, like if there were mistakes, all of that's in the past. And so you have to figure out a way to not dwell on that and move forward with how you're going to change things in the future.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit about that pertaining to your professionals here in a little bit. But Annaleece, do you have anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, so I would just say that, like, I think it's kind of hard for some people to understand that, like, adoptive parents, like, you are the beneficiary here, right? It involves loss, a guaranteed loss for everybody else in the triad, and I'm not trying to, like, say that there's any less weight on issues of infertility and things like that, but in adoption itself, the adoptive parent is the beneficiary, and they do get to make that choice. And because of that, I feel like in my personal experience, I've seen people kind of looking at adoptive parents, like, kind of criticisms of the culture and of ethical issues, and they kind of take them more seriously because they're like, oh, like you benefited from this and you're still seeing a problem, right? Because a lot of the time you have an adoptee that says it's trying to speak out and they're just angry and ungrateful, right? Or you have a birth parent, and a lot of the time I kind of get this pushback where I'm the bad guy and I, caused all of this to happen, and just a lot of real anger there. And so I think that it's just important to realize that, like, it's unfortunate for the rest of us, but like adoptive parents in all reality just do get heard more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I mean, I think it's in a lot of ways like any privileged voice against any marginalized community. Like we see all of the time that the privileged voices, when we can finally say, oh yeah, I do have a privilege here. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like it doesn't make you a bad guy because you have privilege. But it also, like, when you can acknowledge that, then you can start to make changes for the better, and you start to lift up other voices and work towards change. So that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. Adoptive parents, nobody is saying that we're the bad guys, that, anything like that, but it's just a fact that we have more privilege within the adoption community when it comes to who is really listening to us. And so that means that we have the ability to really make change and to advocate for change. So we can take something that sounds really bad, we have privilege, and turn it into something positive. So let's kind of talk about some of the things, some of the practical things that we kind of wish that more adoptive parents would step into and do. I was doing a Instagram live recently with Allison Sweatman. She is a fellow adoptive mama, and she is a big advocate within the disability community. And we did a live not too long ago together, and we were talking about how one of the big things as adoptive parents that we can do is just by how we talk about our children's adoptions, by how we talk about our adoption journey and our children's birth parents, that we can start to change how our families and our communities think about adoption and adoption trauma, and how they view birth parents and expectant parents and all that stuff. So I'd love to chat a little bit about that because, again, that's not something that has to even take place on social media. It can just be in conversations like day to day with your family. So let's just keep kind of going in the same order. So Claire, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. And so that's kind of what, when we had originally kind of planned this, was one of the main thoughts that ran through my head was that, there's a lot of adoptive parents, I think, that when they come into this community, the advocacy education community, and it's not just adoptive parent education they're consuming, when they start consuming adoptee voices and birth parent voices, they get a sense of overwhelm. Like, I think they kind of almost shut down because they're like, oh, wow, they're telling me I can't do anything right. And I feel helpless and I don't know what to do because I just brought this brand new baby home and now I'm doomed. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I just, there's nothing I'm going to do that's going to be right. And then it's going to be my child 34 years from now saying all of these things, right? And I think the first step is, honestly, you don't have to have a big platform, but you do have to listen to adoptee and birth parent voices, because I know you're already listening to adoptive parent voices. So you need to add some other voices into the content that you're consuming. Obviously, if you're take baby steps, if you're easily overwhelmed, you don't have to just take it all in at once. But it's important. And it's also important to digest the information without immediately becoming defensive. And so what I mean by that is I'll use myself as an example. If I write something that's from my perspective, which all of my content is from my perspective, it's my journey, it's my life, it's 34 years of my life that I'm writing about. Know that it's deeply affected me in this way. It doesn't mean that it's about you. And it doesn't mean that you have done this or you've already done it or you're going to do it in the future. It's purely awareness. And so I think from there, once you're able to do that as an adoptive parent, then you can become, like what you're saying, Stephie, is more empowered when you're in your own family or in your own social groups or your church. Church is a huge one. When you hear adoption language that isn't quite right, or when you hear things like, you know, adoptees referred to as orphans, or when you hear these little things that don't sound significant and don't sound like, you know, they're easy to brush off for you, it's those small changes that take adoptive parents that are in those circles to speak up and say, actually, you know, if someone says, oh, you're so lucky that, you know, your child is so lucky they have you as parents. That's your opportunity right there. Instead of just shutting down and smiling and saying, you know, just knowing that it's wrong, but just moving on, that's your opportunity there to correct that narrative right there. And it doesn't have to be rude. It doesn't have to be mean, but that is advocacy for your child and for their birth mother, because that's your opportunity to take a stand in that moment, whether it's in the grocery store, in the church pew, at Thanksgiving dinner, like whatever it is. You know, it can be small. It can be a 2-minute conversation, and it doesn't take 10,000 followers to do that. But it does take consistent openness to hearing other voices. Because there's just not a lot of adoptive parents talking about things that, you know, people like me and Annaleece talk about. There's just not. I mean, they're out there, you know, like I know, Stephie, you do a really great job, but majority, they don't get to hear it. And so if you can be that person that kind of brings them that small piece of education, I think that right there is a huge step forward, even if it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah, I think even like Annaleece, I think about you with this when I hear people say things like, and I think this is big in the like faith community of, oh, well, aren't you so glad that their birth mother chose life for them?
Stop.
Like, that's an opportunity to be like, well, actually, adoption is not the opposite of abortion, you know, things like that, or just even not sharing things or saying things like that, or letting them get away with saying things like that. Like, it doesn't have to be confrontational, but yeah, Annaleece, talk about your thoughts on that.
So I just kind of wanted to give a little bit of like a picture of what that can look like, and what the results of those really small conversations are. So my birth daughter's parents have done a really, really good job educating their family, their extended family. And that has made such an enormous difference for me, because now I can go to their events and things like that. I go to, you know, her birthday parties and some other big family events like that, and I feel safe and I feel comfortable, and that's made my experience so much better. Because it's one thing, it's great if you can feel comfortable with your birth child's parents, but like it's another thing to really feel like you can be a part of their family, and that you don't have to kind of shrink and hide into the shadows, because that's how it feels for me a lot of the time, that I need to like make myself as small as I can so as not to make others uncomfortable. And so if you have a really open adoption, that's really important, because now I'm good friends, you know, with their extended family members, and it has been so incredibly healing for me to feel accepted. So not only does that benefit me, obviously, but it benefits all of the children in that family that were adopted, and everybody else that those people will meet in their whole lives. because now those people can be educating other people. The family members will meet other people that are adopted, and it just kind of like ripples out from there. So even the way that you talk to your family is going to influence their opinion way more than anything that you could post on social media to strangers. So I think that it can be overwhelming to feel like you want to make a difference, but that you can't because you don't have such a big following or whatever. But you have the opportunity just within your home to make such a big ripple effect that's going to really directly affect a lot of people, and you'll be able to see that with your own eyes. And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think some of the comments that I get a lot are actually not just from people I know on the internet, or from Instagram, but people that I know in my real life, my friends, my family members, even people that I went to high school with, who have seen how we've talked about the mamas that chose us and then chose to parent, how we talk about our daughter's birth family, how we talk about our daughter, all of those things. And they've said, oh my gosh, I've learned so much about adoption. These are not people that are necessarily connected to a triad in any other way, but they've said, like, actually, my connection to your adoption and learning about your journey, like, I had a friend who felt like I was a safe space, that they could tell me that they were adopted or they were a birth parent, or any of those things. Like, suddenly they are now a safe space, and now they are sort of an ally outside of our little family. So I think it's more powerful than you realize, right? Like, to just teach your family how to be kind and how to interact. And
yeah, and I think that that's important to acknowledge too, what you just said about, because of the way that you've spoken about your adoption with your family and friends creates a safe space. And that's what Annaleece said too, like, you feel safe with your child's biological family because of the work that they've done. And I think that's important because I'm, 34 years old, and I don't tell people that I'm an adoptee. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, my brother just got married last year, and I met, his wife's entire extended family. Not once did I, specifically mention, even though it was obviously being talked about, because I don't really look like my family. But, I just don't, it's one of those things where if I'm 34 and still don't feel 100% comfortable, then you bet your 5, 10, 13-year-old child doesn't feel entirely comfortable, talking about their adoption openly, even within their own family units. So,
yeah, I always tell people, like, I guarantee you there's someone that you don't realize is connected to adoption. Most likely, if you don't know, they're probably an adoptee or a birth parent. Maybe they're an adoptive parent, but usually us adoptive parents, we usually like to talk about it. So, like, there could be someone that you've known for years and you don't realize that they have this connection. But if you're a safe space, maybe they'll open up to you and have somebody else that they can talk to, and a whole new level of your relationship might open up with that person. Like, maybe they're going to be like your new best friend because they felt safe to talk to you. And I don't know, like, it's just, I think that ripple effect is such an important, like, image for me. It's not just about our little pods. It goes so much further than that. So we talked a little bit about this, but this role of being a learner, of listening to other voices in the triad. Annaleece, I know you mentioned that specifically. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think where that comes from, like, in my heart, like, that want, is because I feel like sometimes, like, personally, and I know that other people have felt this way, it kind of feels like you're screaming into the void a little bit if you're trying to provide education and you get no like positive feedback and no like all you get is pushback or just crickets, you know? And so that's kind of where that like emotionally is for me, is like I just want to like shake people and make them listen, because you don't have to like, there are so many people that have this really valuable resource for you. We have this lived experience and we can show you like what kinds of things to be looking for, how to be a better parent, how to have a better open adoption, all of this stuff. And a lot of us are giving it away for free. It's not a lot of effort to kind of take on that role. I think that it can be hard because I think that taking on the role of a learner can be really threatening, because the way that it is that adoption kind of sometimes feels like a hierarchy where adoptive parents are usually like the more educated, wealthier people. So it can be uncomfortable and awkward to be learning from other people, or from people that you kind of see your own child in. That can really, really threatening as well. But I think that it is of the utmost importance that you do that. And it really is, it can be a lot to emotionally process, but it's free. We're giving it away. Learn about it, think about it, read a book, you know, and it will make a lot of difference for your child.
Learn about it, go back, process it with your therapist. You should have a therapist. If you're an adoptive parent, you should have a therapist. If you're a human being, you should have a therapist. Claire, do you have anything else to add? I know you kind of talked a little bit about it.
Yeah, so I mean, I echo everything that was just said. I just think that it's also really important to note that, and I'll use like a real life example, is that, you know, if you are one of these adoptive parents that is plugged in to this community via social media, and you do have a platform, and you are learning and you are doing all of these things, you're consuming all of this content, you're hearing all these voices, please use your platform to also elevate us. And because I was thinking about this, and this is not like any type of like negativity or like shade whatsoever, but there was a very widely circulated post last week about adoption trauma written by an adoptive mom. And it was a great post. I really liked it. I thought it was like well written, well thought out. I mean, I shared it because I thought it was good. But what really struck me is that adoptees have been, like Annaleece said, screaming into a void, trying to say that all adoptees have trauma, the pre-verbal trauma of separation, if you're an infant adoptee like me. And we've been sometimes feel like we're talking to a brick wall. And it took that adoptive parent to write that post, and it took off like wildfire. And I think that's great. I think that's awesome that there are adoptive parents that are willing to step out and say, you know what, like this is traumatic for my child and all of the other children that have been separated by adoption. But then we need to, you know, in general, as a community, we need to recognize that there are adoptees and birth parents in this space already that are educating on this and that are saying this and that are putting in the work, like sharing our very deep personal stories about this. And we need to make sure that not only are we consuming and being that learner, that lifetime learner, but we're also, you know, pointing to these other resources, like Annaleece said, which are 99% free and easily consumable and easily accessible. So I just wanted to add that because I don't think people understand that as much when they see this really great content and really great education that's being put out there. They don't take a step back to understand that in order for that adoptive parent to get to that place, they had to listen to our voices. Not exactly us, but you know what I mean? Collectively, they had to listen to our voices first. Because I highly doubt that there's a ton of adoption trauma education in your home study, but maybe in some states they do a really great job. But I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that I highly doubt it. It was probably all post-placement type stuff that they learned. So yeah, there's just, I don't know. It's one of those things where when I talk to adoptive parents, and they ask me without fail, they always ask me, what do you wish your parents did differently? And my response every single time is, I wish that they had had more education. Bottom line, because they're trying now, they're trying to now that I've like started this whole public platform thing. But I'm 34 years old. There's only so much they can unlearn at this point. Like, they're trying, but I wish that they had had more education. So if that's the number one thing that, me as an adoptee and other adoptees have said it as well, you better believe that you probably need it too. Even if you think you're, one of the more, aware adoptive parents, there's always something to learn from listening.
Yeah, and it never ends. Which, like, that sounds very like doom and gloom. Oh my God, it never ends. But I mean, there's always something to learn, even after you've brought your child home, even after, you've been parenting them for 5, 10, 15, 34 years. There's still something that you can learn about how to be a better adoptive parent. So we touched super briefly about like your agencies, your professionals. Obviously, you have the opportunity, if you are a hopeful adoptive parent, if you're still sort of researching adoption, deciding what you're going to do, like, you have the ability to really look into the professionals, pick somebody that is going to be ethical, all that stuff. But even after your adoption is finalized, maybe there's stuff, and honestly, I think Ashley Mitchell says this all the time, like, there's not going to be a perfect situation. There's never going to be a perfect adoption. There's always going to be like something that you probably look back and you're like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that, or that had been done differently. But let's talk about how adoptive parents can, give feedback to the agencies, to the professionals, in terms of talking about the experience of working with them. I know after we had our daughter home and we were, pretty much done with all the paperwork, and it was really just on to like the stuff with the attorney and finalizing and all of that, our agency reached out to me just to, kind of follow up. And they actually asked me, did you find the educational, the resources that we provided, the education that we provided, to be helpful? And I had like, it was right there. They just opened the door for me to walk through to say, nope. And I did. I said, no, I didn't. But then I didn't leave it there either. I said, no, not really. But here are the resources that I have found that were really helpful. And, I shared a lot of Instagram profiles. I shared, both of your guys. I shared Ashley, Kindred and Co., a lot of these Instagram profiles. I shared books that I read myself, resources like that, with them, and encouraged them to check them out. Now, does that mean they're necessarily going to do it? Maybe not. But I made it known that, hey, for us, your education didn't really cut it, but here's stuff that did, and that I would encourage you to look at and, share with your prospective families and all of that kind of stuff. So are there other things that you guys think that adoptive parents can do with regards to, even if everything's finalized and done, like going back to their professionals and saying, hey, here's some suggestions, or hey, here's what you could have done differently?
So, I mean, I think they absolutely should be going back to their professionals. First of all, there's a line between if there's something that is unethical going on with your placement. I would hope, and I know it's hard, but my goal is to at least educate adoptive parents on like empowering them to have that upper hand to address unethical issues from the jump. But if you've already finalized and there were unethical issues, that now you've consumed more education and you realize like, oh, we might have done that and that doesn't seem right, but we did it because our agency or our attorney or whoever said that it was okay. Go back to them, and even if their intention, like even if they weren't intending it to be a certain way, like alert them to the fact that the way that you talk about expectant mothers on your website isn't really right. Like you use the term birth mother and they're not really birth mothers because they haven't placed yet. Things like that, that you might realize now. Now, if it's an extreme ethical, borderline illegal problem, then you need to go up higher. You need to circumvent them and go to like this, I don't know, it's like the board or something of the state. We won't get into all of that, but the things like adoption language and like Stephie, you said about inadequate education. If you're working with an agency, because listen, I'm in North Carolina and I'm in Charlotte. And so I was asking some agencies around here, how many hours of pre-placement education do you require? One of them told me none, 0 hours. So let me get this straight. Tomorrow, I could go sign up to adopt a baby, and you wouldn't even think it's important for me to learn about adoption? Problem. So if that's your agency, you need to call them. Another person told me 7. I watched like that, you know, I can stream that on Netflix in a day. So like if I can watch, you know, Tiger King, you can go like get some adoption education that's more than 7 hours. So those are the kind of things that like after you're through the process and you realize, oh, you know what, probably requiring 0 hours wasn't appropriate. I need to go back and tell them that they need to add more. And here's the resources I use, like you did, Stephie. I think that's really important. And I think that I had another thing, and maybe it'll come back to me, but I just think that adoptive parents need to hold their professionals accountable. You paid them for a service. I'm not trying to say it to be blunt, but like you paid them. That was your money, and it's a lot of money that you gave them. And so if you're dissatisfied with the experience and the outcome, no matter if it's 5 years after your placement, you have a right to go back and tell them that. And a lot of times I hear from adoptive parents that they're using the same agency for their second adoption. So I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to do this. If your agency isn't capable of hearing feedback from you, then they don't care about you, and you shouldn't be using them for your second adoption, period. If they don't want to hear what you have to say as an adoptive parent who paid them and went through the process with them, you don't need to be using them. I also hear a lot that they just don't feel comfortable, like, you know what I mean? They just don't feel empowered. They don't feel comfortable. And I just think that if we remember from what we did at the beginning of this video is that you hold the privilege and the power. That's meant, like Stephie said, not to be a negative thing. That's meant to be an empowering thing. Like you can be in control of some of these outcomes that can really change. It might not change your placement, and it might not change your triad, but it can change things for other adoptees and their families. So.
Right. And I think even looking at it on even a smaller scale, looking at your own family, if you find out that something happened to your child's birth mother while they were expecting, you find that out and then you just sit with that information, like that can be hurtful. But if you say, you know, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Here's what I'm going to do about it. I'm going to go to them and I'm going to say something. Then that's so like, that's such a healing thing to feel like somebody is advocating for you. And I'm sure that it's the same way for the children. You know, there are a lot of things that are misinformed that that adoption agencies will say about adoptees. And if your child comes to you and they're having this feeling, right, and that goes against what your agency told you was going to happen, like, you can go to them and you can say, hey, like, just so you know, this information that I was given was inaccurate. Here's some things to back it up, because there's almost always stuff to back up, that adoption is a lot harder than agencies make it out to be. So even if it does nothing, like, in the long term for the agency, even if they don't care, even if they don't listen, it's going to make so much of a difference for the more vulnerable people in your triad, that you went out and you said something and you did something about it.
Yeah, and one other thing I was going to add, because this is kind of like my personal experience that I'm living through right now, is when it comes to like birth certificates and records, can't even tell you how many, whenever I talk about original birth certificates, I get so many adoptive parents who are in the adoption process or getting ready to finalize, who are like, wait, I can ask for this? Like, no one told me I could ask for this. Why didn't they tell me? How do I get it? What do I do? Blah, 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 blah. And so, because they're frantic, because they hear someone like me being like, this is really important and you can do something about this. That kind of stuff, like, don't be afraid to push the buttons. And if they tell you no, you can tell them, actually, I can get it. And here's how, because be informed. I live in this state. This is the law. I have an open adoption. You can request it before finalization and you can give me a copy. And I just think that the more that adoptive parents can push back, because like something small like that, right? That's going to change a lot for your individual family and for your individual adoptee. That's not going to reform the laws that have to take place to make open records for like every single adoptee in the United States of America. But what that will do is that plants the seed in that specific agency, attorney, whoever's head, to know that, okay, next time we get someone that wants to request this, this is the process we do, because they may not even know. They've done it this way for 30 years and they might not know that you can request these in this way before finalization. They may not think it's important. And so even, I know that's not a little thing, that's a very big thing. And like, if that's a very big stance to take with your agency, or whoever you're using, adoption professional, but it's also an important stance. And that can be applied to anything, but that's one like actual tangible thing that I think people can ask about and really push back on, because the more we, are informed about the specific rights and laws that are governing our adoption process, the better you can advocate. And so, a lot of people just look to their professionals to guide them through that process, thinking that they're gonna tell you everything you need to know. But yet, without fail, every time I talk about birth certificates, I get at least 15 direct messages, frantic adoptive parents, rightfully so frantic, because they had no idea. But yeah, just, my little soapbox for just a minute.
I don't want you to get off your soapbox, actually. I want you to stay on your soapbox for a minute, because I want to talk about that, because this is important, but I think it ties to just generally the laws around adoptee rights, and in particular, and that we as adoptive parents, like, we can play a role, whether it's on a more of a micro level of getting our child's original birth certificate, and maybe even, making sure that maybe if we can, getting 2 copies so that we can make sure that their birth mother has a copy if she didn't get one from the hospital or before finalization or whatever, so that everybody has one. So that's sort of, on the micro level, to even up to the macro level of what actually are the laws in our states. What can we do as adoptive parents when it comes to reform? And that sounds very scary. That sounds very like, oh my gosh, I'm going to march on the Capitol and like, that's not really it. So I think that we forget that we can use our voices to make calls and write letters to our representatives, that we can hop on Google and figure out what are the laws in our states. There's a website called adopteerightslaw.com that I really like, because it goes through every single state and what their laws are with regards to access to original birth certificates. And it organizes them out based on, like, I have lots of feelings on this, based on unrestricted access, which only 10 states have, restricted access, or then no access. And it's put together by an adoptee, and it says when everything was last updated, so you can see a whole like update log. It's not like, oh, it was written in 2016 and it's never been updated. Like, this is updated all of the time. So I love that as a resource. But then, hop on Google. Are there groups in your state that are advocating for adoptee rights that you can join up with? See what they're doing. How can you help them? Can you hop on and write an email to your representative? Like, maybe there is a bill that's being considered and you want to write in support of it, as from an adoptive parent perspective, as someone who is touched by adoption. So I want to remind any adoptive parents or hopeful adoptive parents that are watching that, again, like, we hold so much more power than we think that we do, just with the ability to say, like, hey, I'm an adoptive parent, this affects my family, this is my opinion on this matter. And does that mean that we're going to change like a national law so that amended birth certificates don't completely erase the birth parents? Maybe not, but maybe we can change something with access in our own state. So that's like my continuation of your soapbox. But Claire, I want to hear that more from you on it.
Can you imagine? I think it's this number might be wrong, but like 7 million adoptees, like in the United States right now. I'll go find a source. I just remember reading that. That's probably wrong, but let's just pretend the number is 7 million, just for kicks. Could you imagine? So each of those adoptees has a family. If every single one of those families took the time to write a letter, write an email, make a phone call, hold their representatives accountable, it might not change the law tomorrow, but if you kept doing it, maybe a few more states would turn over. Maybe they would say, oh, we're getting a lot of pressure to do this. This is really easy. This makes such common sense. Because what happens with adoption reform, especially adoptee rights laws, is they get buried with other bills. And then they also get changed through like the legislative process. So what started as a clean bill for adoptee rights gets muddled and gross and icky. And by the time it gets to the floor, it's not really a clean bill anymore. It's actually pretty dirty. And it actually doesn't give the adoptees any more rights than they already had. It's just worded in a way that makes it seem like they're giving in to things like records and birth certificates. Utah was the most recent one, passed a terrible law with access to birth certificates. It wasn't a clean bill. And, it was like we gave it the old college try and here's what we came up with. But what happens now that bill's on the books, it's going to be a whole nother cycle before anything else is presented or written or anything like that. But I just think that the other big thing on the table right now, especially in our country right now, is adoptee citizenship. And so even if you didn't adopt internationally, you're still an adoptive parent and the industry still listens to you. Like, that's the kind of stuff that, is not difficult to click through and sign a petition or send an email or call your representative about, because that kind of stuff is heartbreaking. I don't know if you guys have watching this or even you guys have looked into any of these stories, but I mean, we're talking about not only adoptees that were separated from birth families in their origin, in their culture, but now they're risking being pulled away from the only family they've known and sent back to a country that is literally foreign to them. And so because they were never granted citizenship in this country. So just things like that, they just get under my skin because I feel like I just feel like there are steps we can take, but it's going to take more than just adoptees saying it, just birth mothers saying it. We have to have the adoptive parents in our corner doing some of these things. Start with your own triad, like we've been saying, start with your own family. And then as you get more comfortable, you know, you might have to send an email or make a phone call or something. Like, I don't say that to be trivial, but like you eventually, to affect real change, you're going to have to step out of that circle at some point, even if it's really small. It doesn't have to be massive, but yeah, that's just adoptee rights. And it's not just adoptee rights too, because it is about the birth mothers and the birth families, because like they can't even access the records once they're sealed. So it's not just about me, like it is my birth certificate, but it's also hers, you know? And so she can't have it either. And she just can't go get it. So I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I know there's also, like, when we're talking about birth parents, like looking at like open adoption agreements, and are those enforceable, and that depends on where you live and all of that kind of stuff too. So there's lots of different aspects to this. But Annaleece, do you have anything to add?
I would just say, as far as the legislation and things, like, I feel like it can be difficult to feel like you're making a huge difference because you're just one person. And when you're talking about, you know, other legislation, like, you're a much smaller part of the population of interest generally. But in this situation, let's take 7 million, right? You are so much more, like, percentage wise, of that population than you are of the population of the area that you live in. So what you do and say does actually make more difference than you think it does. And if you have all of the interested parties kind of going one way and saying, hey, we want this, right, then you're giving them less reason to not just change it. Because if you have a pretty common consensus, right, and it's not costing a ton of money or you know, whatever, and it's obviously not that simple by any means, but yeah, it just, you definitely can make way more of a difference than you think you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So Claire just said in the chat, no, this is great. No, I want to talk about this. So okay, Annaleece, do you think that adoptive parents should and can do more to push forward laws protecting expectant moms and birth moms, like, you know, for example, not flying women across state lines, these, you know, quote, adoption friendly states, stuff like that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there are a lot of things you can do about it. Obviously there's legislation like we've been talking about. You can make sure any expectant mothers that are in communication with you know what their rights are. It wasn't really by anybody's fault, but there were some things that happened to me that really shouldn't have, because I didn't know what I could ask for. And so I think, and I see it all the time because I'm a part of a lot of different support groups, and they're like, you know, for example, I was allowed to see my child before I signed papers and things like that. And it's like, it's some thing that they were given by the adoptive parents, but that's legally what they're allowed to do. And obviously, like, as far as like flying women in and things like that, like, I mean, that's blown up because it's become a trafficking issue at this point, right? And I think calling that what it is really can grab the attention. So even if you are not adopting from a situation like that, even if you adopted a really long time ago, if you're calling attention to issues like this, then people are going to look at it and they're going to like be horrified, and then they're going to be interested to learn more for themselves. And then I can't express to you how much of a difference it makes for me to feel like there are adoptive parents out there who actually care about my rights, because my being happy doesn't necessarily like directly affect the way they feel about themselves. Because if you obviously want what's best for your child, and most of the issues that happen there are really misguided attempts from parents trying to do what's best for their adoptee, and that definitely like gets confused, and that's a totally valid issue. And there's a totally separate issue with birth parents where I kind of feel like I'm always in this competition, like kind of put in that place where I feel like I said before, I have to make myself small, or I can't like overstep those boundaries. And it just makes such a huge difference to feel like there are people that actually care about me as a person, even if it doesn't benefit them at all, whether or not I'm happy or not. And it just honestly like has changed my life. The way that my birth daughter's parents and other adoptive parents have treated me has changed my life and made me feel so much less ashamed and feel so much more comfortable like cultivating that relationship with my birth daughter, and feeling like my rights matter, that I matter. And so even if you can't fix all of the big problems, like making vulnerable people feel like they matter, it just changes everything.
Yeah, and it's like one of the most rewarding things that I found, because I'm new as of this year to actually sharing more about my personal beliefs and perspectives on adoption. And it's incredibly rewarding or just validating when, first of all, I mean, I love talking to other adoptees. It's like instant connection. They speak my language. We can just pick right up and just run with it. But it's something extra special when I get messages from birth mothers or adoptive parents who they don't even have to say anything profound. Just the simple, like, if it's a really like deeply personal topic I'm talking about, like, I'm really sorry that happened to you. Or, I read your blog or your post or your story, and it really opened my eyes to this, something I didn't think about before. Like, just that validation of that there's people, like you said, Annaleece, that my happiness and my life and my journey really don't impact them in any way, shape, or form. But the fact that they care enough to acknowledge me as a person, I don't know, it's really healing, like, in a way. And it just makes me hopeful when I get those messages that, on the other side of those messages, if it's coming from an adoptive parent or a birth mom, there's an adoptee in that relationship that like won't have to feel the way I feel, or won't have to be treated the way I was treated. And that they can be healthier and happier because of that. So I don't know, just even if you are an adoptive parent that watches this, even if you're not, capable of doing these things like writing letters and sharing and writing posts and all of that stuff, like, if you can reach out to the people in this adoption community that aren't from the same, experience as you, and just validate their feelings and let them know that you're there and that you see them, and that speaks volumes. At least it does to me. And I know, Annaleece, you just said it does to you. It's so rewarding.
Yeah, I've had a number of adoptive parents at different times over the last few years reach out to me and say, hey, like, I read this or I saw this video that you made, and it changed the way that I parented or treated my child's birth mother in some small way. You know, I'm not out there like changing anybody's lives profoundly, but just knowing that like something that I did or said actually made, like you said, an impact, and that there's a child or an expectant mother out there who's even a little bit happier because of something that I did, it makes me feel like there was a point and a purpose to all of the really horrible things that I went through to get to where I am, and that maybe somebody else won't have to do that. And it gives me the energy to just keep going, to feel like, you know, it's not just screaming into the void, and that I am being heard, even if it's just a short little, like, you know, thank you for sharing this. Like, it really does. It changes things for me, and it gives me the energy to keep going and keep pushing and keep trying.
That's amazing. So I think that's a pretty great note to end on. So unless either of you guys have anything else that you want to add in terms of, you know, roles or things that adoptive parents can do, I think, you know, we've covered a few things, and, you know, it ranges very much from things that you can do within your own family to things that you can do on a local and a national level or with your professionals. So you've got a lot of options, you guys. So now your homework is to pick something and do it. Pick something and do it, even if it's as simple as, you know, like Claire and Annaleece said, like sending a message to someone not on your side of the triad and saying, hey, I appreciate you so much for sharing your story with me. Or, you know, here's $5 for coffee, or whatever it is. Those are things that can make a big difference. So thank you guys. Thank you two for being here with me when I message you with my hair braid. Hey, I got a video idea. Do you want to do this with me? Thank you for taking time away from your families to join me and to share some stuff with the community. And thank you guys for watching. And, you know, please let us know if you have questions, and let us know what you are going to do within your triad and your community. We'd love to hear it. So thanks, guys.